Welcome back. One man is using the elements of hip hop to strengthen and improve inner city schools. Dr. Shango Blake, also known as the nation's hip hop principal, joins me to discuss his work bridging the gap between hip hop and education. Dr. Blake, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Yes, exactly. So, can you tell me what led you on the path to become the nation's hip hop principal?
I wish I could tell you that, I had this grand idea about hip hop and how I was going to conceptualize it. But the reality is that I had taken over this low performing school that was really just everything that you would think about in terms of urban blight and what have you. Low teacher morale, poor student attendance, faculty attendance, you name it. And basically, what would happen was I was trying to get the school in order. And in doing so, I decided that I was going to have these students wear school uniforms. And what ended up happening was that the students thought that that would be something that was taking away their individualism. And so, in order to get them to embrace wearing school uniform, I told them that I would have them wear. We would create a hip hop video and a hip hop song, and that's what got the students excited. So the reality was my willingness as a school leader to engage students and to really focus on finding ways to find a point of connection that led to the birth of the hip hop movement in education.
Now, you often speak about issues in urban education specifically, and I understand you realize this being an actual principal. Can you explain what some of those issues were?
Well, again, if we're talking about urban schools, we're talking about issues of systemic racism, barriers that prevent students from achieving, hunger, um, um, poor relationships between faculty and students because they don't understand where the students are coming from culturally, and this attitude that school is not something that we should strive to do, that education is something that's actually weak. These are the social and emotional barriers that prevent learning from happening. But we have to look at it in a historic context. The trauma that we see happening in schools is rooted in the failure of a system for an entire people. School is not broken, it's in rotation. Schools were never set up actually to teach black and brown students in a country, and we're just coming off of Black History Month, where it was against the law punishable death by death to teach a black person how to read. You wonder why the achievement gap has never been closed. So I'm a realist in this that I know I give you some really big broad ideas, but it plays out in a very concrete way every day within the classroom, where you have teachers that maybe not that are not from the community, students who don't understand the teachers, cultural clashes. All these things are contributors to poor student outcomes.
And I like that you kind of hinted or like said that it's a multitude of things. It's not just one thing. So I agree 100% that and that's why it's sometimes very hard to tackle because you're dealing with so many things at once. But I know you're using music and you're using hip hop. You talked about it a little bit. Can you just explain further how are you using hip hop to address these issues in education, and what made this actually look like?
Well, first of all, hip hop is the voice of the voiceless. So if you think about the origins of hip hop, the five elements, right? Break dancing, DJing, or turntablist, MC, a wordsmith, graffiti artist, and the last element was knowledge and purpose. And so hip hop is a perfect vehicle to give students voice. And when I first came up with this, you have to understand I was doing this, telling my age, in 2003. So we're talking about close to 20 years ago that this concept of bringing hip hop into schools was born. But I was looking at how hip hop was used at that time to market popular soft drinks and clothing and things of that nature. And I thought to myself, why can't we use hip hop to market, academic excellence and achievement? And so for me, you asked the question in terms of what it looks like. For me, it wasn't just like a classroom program or something where you do, from an instructional standpoint, although there was instructional components integrated through every aspect of it. But it's about a whole school reform approach. It's about communicating with students, meeting them where they are, engaging them, and also addressing implicit bias. And so I did it through project-based learning, thematic units, where we would take students and organize them into production teams. And they had an opportunity to produce their own videos, right? And they produce their own videos using what they're supposed to be learning in school. So now that learning becomes relevant to me because I'm actually applying it. And in educational terms, we would say that that is applied learning, right? If I am the part of the budget team, then I'm in my math classes, we're figuring out, we're using graphs, chart, data to figure out how we're going to produce a quality product without going over production cost, things of that nature. If I'm a film, if I'm storyboarding, then I'm going to use the elements of writing, right, to produce the film. These are the kind of things that we did instructionally.
Now, I'm really happy that you kind of brought that up. I wanted to say that, like, when it comes to music and education, even though you use it a little bit differently, people typically think of classical music or jazz, and they don't often think about hip hop, maybe until recently. Can you just further explain why you chose hip hop as a tool to actually connect to these students?
Because that's where they live. I know what hip hop did for me, and I'm glad that you said that because I'm a pioneer as relates to this. You if you trace the origins of the hip hop education movement, all roads point to Dr. Blake, aka Dr. Blizzy. And I want to say that I was challenged in the beginning because people didn't understand exactly what I was doing in terms of connecting with youth culture to move them to academic excellence and achievement. But it's music, it's poetry, it's art. And the ironic thing is that do you know that New York City school system indirectly gave birth to the rise of hip hop? Because they were taking in the 70s, because of the economic crisis in the city, they were removing arts and music from the school. So here you have all these inner city young people in the Bronx, right, with all this bursting creative energy and nowhere to place it. And so they went into the parks and they used their parents' old records and they put on park jams and basement parties. And this began the birth of hip hop. And I was the first wave of the hip hop generation whose parents said, turn off that noise. That's not music. That's not art. But look at us. Look how many years later we're getting ready to have a universal hip hop museum in the Bronx. You can't tell me that hip hop isn't art and that it cannot be used to connect with young people and absolutely be transformational.
Now, I want to bring up, for a very long time, hip hop was associated with anti school themes, and I think you mentioned this previously in an interview. How did you actually combat this?
Well, again, this is where we deal with now implicit bias, right? So what really is the problem? The problem is this: people associate it with popular pop culture, and they call that hip hop. They don't go into the elements of what hip hop is. So I spent time teaching the teachers, the parents, and the community who were at first saying, "Well, what is this? That here is the culture of hip hop, and you can't confuse the entire culture with one aspect of hip hop that they're calling hip hop today." So most people look at if hip hop was a family, one child became famous, and that child was the rapper, and then that rapper had children, and those children were, it could have been party rap, it could have been gangster rap, it could have been storytelling rap. These are the children, and out of those children, one child became popular, and it was the gangster rapper, and then that gangster rapper had children, and that child was your drill rapper. So it goes on, but you're looking at one slither of the entire culture and defining it as if it is the whole. So a lot of times it has to be an opportunity to educate and reteach. But if you listen to the basis of hip hop, the other child that was ignored, the DJ, the person responsible for the beat, That goes all the way back to the essence of who we are. That goes back to Africa, the drum. And the drum comes from the heartbeat, right? And so you're talking about spirit and soul and culture. And let me tell you something. All we did was take that beat. I don't care if it's trap music or drill music, and replace the message from a message of things that will dehumanize to a message that will elevate.
So we have just a little over a minute left. Can you just tell me, about the outcome this program or this, this movement has had on schools?
Oh, so now you look all around the country. First of all, let me just show you. 20 years ago, this is the actual the DVD. For those young people who don't know about DVDs, there was a thing called a DVD where we play music, right? And this is the cover, right? Produced by students, organized by students, sold by students, and they learned a lot. It went all around the country. We were on Oprah, we were on HBO, we were in the Tribeca Film Festival. And this was the thing that sparked the movement where now you see teachers rapping in classrooms. You'll see a video every once in a while about someone doing a certain dap with the students as they walk in. All of that came from the work that the staff and the students at this little school in Queens called IS 109 did years ago. And now we see it expanding everywhere. And as we said before, your Hamiltons and other kinds of plays. If you look and you trace back to the origin, it points back to the work that happened at that school.
That's amazing. Dr. Blake, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I really love this conversation. And I feel like it could go on honestly for hours. But can you can you quickly let people know where they can actually go to find more information about this?
Okay, so you can go to my IG, which is TNHHP, or you can go to the website itself called the Nation's Hip Hop Principle.com. I'll say it again, and it's one word, the Nation's Hip Hop Principle.com.
All right. Dr. Blake, thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.